Okay, and our final speaker, after this we'll have some general questions. I might invite the panelists to come up and maybe we can answer some questions. Erin Snyder, from the University of Haifa.
Hello. The study I'm going to present today is done with Professor Dr. Canetti from the University of Haifa in collaboration with Hassan Pedersen from the University of Australia. And we're interested in policy attitudes towards asylum seekers, doing a comparative study between Australia and Israel. So who would support exclusionary policy towards asylum seekers? And what is an exclusionary policy? I'm trying to answer those questions in a few minutes. Just the main motivation of this project is to separate between attitudes towards policy and attitudes towards a social group. And because they are similar phenomena, but not identical. And despite the very big scholarly work done in many years about immigration, there isn't a clear distinction between those two. So just so we're on the same page, although we almost touched asylum seekers are people who request shelter and asylum at the first safe state they arrive to, and begin process to ask for refugee status. Until they receive it, they are asylum seekers. So that's another motivation of us, is to focus on asylum seekers, as there are some group of the very big phenomena of immigration, but we would like to focus on them because they're different from migrant group and refugees. We are focusing on them. So the main argument of this study is that threat perception affect the relationship between political views and policy attitudes of asylum seekers. And we test this mechanism in a comparative framework to Israel and Australia. So we'll go a little bit to theory. Perceived threat is considered the single best group level predictor in exclusionism and intolerance within intergroup relations. And threatened people usually tend to support antis out-group member attitudes, to take their power, to exclude them, a little less positive than your thinking. And it's usually divided into realistic threat and positive threat. Realistic threat is dealing more with the realistic threat itself. People will take our jobs, will take our land, and rates of crime will elevate. And the other one is symbolic threat. People are afraid for the values and culture of the country, religion, family values, language, etc. In regard to immigration, threat perception were found to be very important and predict highly anti-immigrant relation and sentimental threat perception is in regard to that. And political ideology, many researchers show that conservatives are less likely than liberals to support immigrants, and of course liberals, left-wing people, to support multiculturalism, and so on. So basically, our mechanism we offer is that political ideology is mediated, that the relationship between political ideology and political policy attitudes is mediated by threat perception. The more right-wing you are, the more extreme you are to the right, you are experiencing more threat, and that makes you support more exclusionary policy. The same way the other way around. So I promised to explain what happened with what is asylum policy or exclusionary policy. It ranged from supportive to exclusionary. Supportive countries that have supportive policy goes from gives work permits and housing and education and social services, and all the way to exclusionary policy. Of course, the first thing is a very strong boundary between the country to stop the flow of people entering, detention, and transferring them to a third country. Australia just signed one 2 weeks ago, for example. And as I said, we chose Australia and Israel. Why Australia and Israel? Australia has been dealing with the asylum phenomena for many years, since the 70s. Late in the 2000s, they started a new big wave. Israel is dealing with the same one, but a little smaller. It just started in 2005. We are focusing on people in Perth, Australia, and Tel Aviv, Israel, both cities that there is a big amount of asylum seekers residing in them. And just for the reason of this comparison, the similarities, Israel and Australia both signed on the Internet Convention, both Western democratic country. As I said, both has a asylum seekers phenomena, and both adopted a firm asylum policy. The differences are, of course, enormous by size, population. Israel is known for its political conflict, violent and long-lasting. Australia is not. One very big difference also is the chances of a person to actually achieve the refugee status. In Australia, despite the negative and the firm policy, over 90% of the people who asked for to be a refugee status received it, as opposed to in Israel, since it's a Jewish state, immigration law refers mainly to Jews. So we'll go a little bit to the methods. What we did is we ran two different identical surveys in two countries. The Australian survey was done in 2012, the Israeli one in 2014. We checked people from Perth and Israel. We sampled Jewish Israelis and non-Aboriginals and not minorities in both countries. We did an internet survey. And as I promised, if we want to focus on policy attitudes, that's exactly our main measure. We asked people for their opinion on government asylum policy. The rest, we did political ideology, participatory subject on the subjective political position, and threat perception. We measured realistic and symbolic together. As we can see, very quickly, we find high correlation between the variables we looked for. And when we ran the mediation model, we found a partial mechanism. The mechanism worked partially. Threat perception does mediate political ideology and political attitudes. We ran it in both surveys separately. And actually, I spoke so fast. So last, we get to the conclusion. Again, this is the small. We ran it over almost 140 people in most places, so we can't really say much, as you said. But we kind of started the movement of the mechanism of what we think, and the fact that we found it in a comparison analysis, and makes it a little stronger, because no matter the differences, people still are afraid at the same different countries from the same things. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's all our speakers.